Hello and a warm welcome. My name is Declan Hamblin and I work at Kingston University in teacher education. I'm joined by my colleague Alex Beckey for this presentation. We will share with you how we are trying to make sense of meaningful physical education in the next 20 minutes or so. Please work through the slides at your own pace, take notes or jot down any questions that you have. We'll let you know how you can contact us at the end of the presentation. Meaningful physical education is not a new concept. However, the recent work of Tim, Deirdre, Doug and Stephanie has clearly resonated with others, and in particular Alex and I. Whilst we draw upon their work, it is our own interpretation and we're essentially working out loud with you to make sense of it. This is the key strand that runs through our presentation, that meaningful physical education is not a teaching style, a pedagogical model or instructional approach. It is a way to make pedagogical decisions. Whilst we draw on the academic literature to inform our thinking, it is our own thinking which is still in the process of being refined. Our thinking is shaped by both seeing teaching as a highly complex judgment and decision-making process from the big picture to the in-the-moment lesson decisions. We have made sense of meaningful physical education through three metaphors, which we are going to share with you today. Lakoff and Johnson suggest metaphors are a way to conceptualize and understand our experiences, allowing us to share them with others. Metaphors can act as bridges between a common concrete experience and an abstract experience it is trying to describe. And it can help us to make sense of the messiness that is inherent in teaching physical education. The first metaphor we would like to share with you is that of the jigsaw puzzle, which relates to big questions about our subject. First, we have the frame, which relates to your philosophical stance, what education, teaching, and learning is and what it is for. Then we have the picture, which states your purpose for the subject. Having a clear idea of the purpose of PE and articulating it is a key step in learning to teach PE, as you can then begin to work backwards from what you are trying to achieve. There are numerous puzzle pieces. We first need to classify the pieces. It is not just about becoming competent at each of those pieces, but also aligning and fitting them together in a manner that contributes to a coherent bigger picture whilst meeting the needs of both the teacher and their pupils. Coherence is when our vision and beliefs and practices all align. That what we are doing in PE and how we are doing it align to a clear purpose of why. Coherent teaching requires your vision for us, which is in the center of the diagram and is in the white box, values, beliefs, and practices to align. We draw upon Dewey and Fletcher et al. And use meaningful PE as our filter for making professional judgments. We then believe education is about growth, teaching is a continuous act of decision-making on the whys, whats, hows in education, and then that learning is making sense and creating understanding from experiences. This leads us to a vision of physical education where meaningfulness is the priority when making decisions. Therefore, key practices of meaningful PE allows us to achieve that vision. There are, of course, other visions, such as PE is about finding a sport to love and may have a frame suggesting education is about qualification, teaching is telling, and learning is accurate replication, with puzzle pieces concerning sport techniques, moderate to vigorous physical activity, building character, and assessment of performance. In addition, we use the filter of meaningful PE to identify key pedagogical practices too. The critical features encompass fun, personal relevance, social interaction, competence, and optimal challenge, and these are drawn from Kretschmar and the empirical research of Benny. Shared language provides us with a way to engage pupils into dialogue and allows them to communicate with others. Reflective practices allow pupils to engage, and it could be potentially through recording and reflecting on goals, paired discussion, journals, and video recordings. Democratic practices, which could include pupil decision-making, choice, advocacy of self and others, autonomy supportive approaches. And so therefore, meaningful PE is a filter for making those professional judgment and decision-making decisions on what we believe to be key practices that align and make our programs and curriculums coherent.
The second metaphor we're going to look at is the wayfinder. How do PE teachers help to navigate their students through the journey of PE? And the common way is often linear, through short blocks of lessons, where the destination is already set, that children's starting place is never really truly considered, and that the information generated is to measure progress, usually through a one-off assessment of technical performance at the end of a unit of work, which is then not used to inform future teaching, learning, nor links to the overall vision of PE. The Meaningful PE framework challenges that, because if our priority is meaningfulness in the experience, and meaningfulness is personally significant to the individual, we must look to include children in the decision-making process. So there is shared ownership and collaboration on their learning focus and processes. Simply put, wayfinding is finding one's way to a particular place. For those who want to use meaningful PE, that place is the meaningfulness to be found within PE, within movement, sport, and physical activity. The social anthropologist Tim Ingold, in his book Perception of the Environment, likens wayfaring to knowing as you go. That by attending to and attuning to the knowledge in the environment, including our own experiences, we can better understand it and make our way in it. Much like the Polynesians were able to successfully navigate thousands of miles of the Pacific Ocean long before the existence of GPS or maps. The concept of wayfinding is currently being applied to sport by Carl Woods and PE by James Rudd. But we feel it provides a useful metaphor for those who wish to use the Meaningful PE framework, especially implementing reflective and democratic pedagogies. Being a wayfinder in PE is going to be uncomfortable because it means giving up some control. It means giving up control about the final destination, how we might travel there, and what success might look like. It also means generating rich information through the unit of work and not just at the end in the assessment lesson. We need to be able to orientate our students so they know where they are starting at. Help them decide which direction of travel they may wish to go in. To help them monitor and gain feedback of how and where they are traveling to. And to support them to recognise where they ended up and what they learnt on the way. How? Well, the constraints of PE won't allow us to have total freedom, so we will need to think of an area of movement we think is important for the child, an area that they can explore and to help them grow. This area would be even better if students are interested in it and have reasonably ready access to it and related activities in their local communities. In relation to that area of movement, we need to help students orientate themselves by getting a fix on their current starting point. What signs and information do we need them to help look for and reflect upon? And therefore, knowing your students is fundamental to Meaningful PE and the decisions we make. This then allows us to set a direction, and through reflective practices such as goal setting and allowing children some element of choice within that direction. As the lessons progress, students and teachers generate rich information through reflective practices about where they are and where they might wish to go next. Finally, at the end, we can help the students reflect on where they have got to and what they have learned in relation to the direction of travel. So what does this look like in practice, being a wayfinder? It's easy to say that as an academic sitting in my ivory tower, but what does this actually look like within the constraints of a school PE programme? Well, I'm going to draw upon some recent work from Laura Bedens, Michelle Bartoshek and Ty Reddick, who have used the Meaningful PE framework to redesign a cross-country unit of work. Usually this unit of work would last for about 16 lessons, and it's designed for 8 to 12-year-olds. And its focus is on running training to prepare the students for a culminating competition where times will then be displayed on a board outside of the PE to be celebrated. The theme for their unit of work focused on who we are in nature, learning how moving in nature could enrich the quality of their lives, and also to develop a better understanding of the school's trails so they might be able to better appreciate and use them. To begin with, they help students orientate where they are through a series of 3 lessons: a nature walk, orienteering, and trail running. Each lesson they scaffolded reflections on the likes and dislikes and which features of Meaningful PE they connected to whilst they did those activities. Over the next 10 weeks, the students were introduced to a variety of courses. They could choose who they did it with, alone or in groups, and how they did it, either to walk, orienteer or run. At the end of the unit, they had an optional competition, and the teachers helped students to decide whether they wished to compete or continue to explore what they were interested in. This is a great example of autonomy supportive practice, which aligns to democratic pedagogies. Every lesson, the students had to record what they had done, but most importantly, had to reflect on why they had done it. What were they hoping to get out of the activity, with the features of Meaningful PE as a guide, and what they actually got out of it? At the end of the unit, the students had to walk through a gallery of rich information, a meaningful experience mural, which had been completed previously, their early thoughts on walking, running, and orienteering, and the choice and reflection board. This then allowed them to complete a handout intended to help them to come to some deeper understanding about who they are as physical activity participants in the outdoors and why it might matter to them. All this was to prepare them for their final task, the recording of a video reflection on the questions raised by the theme of the unit of work. To summarise, the Wayfinder is a metaphor which highlights 2 key fundamental pedagogical principles in Meaningful PE, that of democratic practices and reflective practices. These aren't a one-off, but an ongoing process to generate rich sources of information to allow children to make better sense of their experiences within PE, and for the teacher to adapt and respond to where the children are at and where they may wish to go next.
The third metaphor we'd like to share with you is the equaliser. At any one moment during a physical education lesson, the PE teacher is inundated with perceptual information. Have a look at this snapshot of a warm-up and imagine you are the teacher. What are you scanning for? What are you immediately drawn to? What are you looking to respond to, and how are you going to respond? Is it the student whose push-up technique might need some improvement? Is it the group of students who have yet to start the task? Is it the student who is race walking around the outside rather than running? Is it the student who is shouting at their partner? What we consider important and what we may pay attention to ultimately shapes how we make sense of what is unfolding and how we respond as a PE teacher. The traditional framework for observing and responding that I was taught as a novice teacher was simple and effective. To look for poor technical cues and correct them, and to look for poor effort cues and motivate them. The meaningful PE framework and the critical features changes the priority and the filter. If used, it allows a PE teacher to go beyond planned, explicit responses which are formal, ordered, and often about short-term improvement of technical performance. There is still a place to develop a holistic view of competence, but not at the expense of what children might find meaningful in PE. By looking for different clues such as smiles, type of communication and interaction, and also the engagement with the activities, the teacher can then look to provide flexible and adaptable responses through ongoing observation, dialogue and negotiation for the long-term improvement of valuing physical active lifestyles through the provision of more meaningful experiences within PE. The equalizer is a way of visualizing the critical features of meaningful PE. In thinking and acting with the equalizer, all the features are always present in PE lessons to some degree, but the teacher has the ability through their responses to either amplify or dampen them, individually or collectively, in pursuit of providing a more meaningful experience to the children being taught. This moves the features beyond a checklist to something integrated and dynamic. For example, the clues you might observe might be negative social interaction, but this may be enhanced more through changing the optimal challenge that is presented to the children in the lesson. Also, the features are a great starting point, but they are not an exhaustive list on what constitutes as meaningful experience in PE and that can be developed, especially if you seek out what the children think. Using the equalizer as our framework for observing, making sense of what is happening and responding, we will behave differently, hopefully in a way that prioritizes meaningfulness for the children we teach. Do we go straight to the boy who's doing the push-up to correct his technique, or do we ask him what he's getting strong for? Do we dictate the movement that the students do, or do we allow them to choose movements that will help them improve activities they already have found personal significance in outside of school? Do we look to immediately sanction those who have not started, or do we seek to find out why not, and if appropriate, how we might look to make the lesson more meaningful together? The equalizer focuses on the critical features of meaningful PE, shaping our observation, our dialogue, and reflection on what is happening and how we might best respond to it, or even if we need to respond at all. It can, if needed, also be used to support children to take charge of their own and others' meaningful experiences within physical education.
So in summary, meaningful PE is a filter for pedagogical decision making. This is the key strand that runs through our presentation and what the metaphors we have shared are trying to make sense of. To repeat, meaningful PE is not a teaching style, a pedagogical model, or instructional approach. It is a way to make those and other pedagogical decisions. Teaching PE is a highly complex decision-making process, a continuous act of making judgments about the whys, whats and hows of physical education, to paraphrase Michael Quenestet, from the big picture of our subject to the moment-to-moment decisions within the lesson. The meaningful PE framework provides us a filter to make those judgments and decisions in a way that prioritises the meaningfulness and personal significance which can be found in PE in a coherent manner. And more than that, it provides a shared language for which children and teachers can make sense of those experiences, their likes and dislikes in the present, good and bad experiences in the past, and their hopes and fears about the role of movement, sport and physical activity in their future, and how it may enrich the quality of their lives. The three metaphors we have shared allow us to make sense of meaningful PE as a filter for pedagogical decisions at all levels of that process. But the jigsaw puzzle helps with our vision and purpose and our curriculum plan, that the Wayfinder helps with our unit and lesson planning, and also how to make coherence from lesson to lesson, and then the equaliser to shape our decisions within the moment of teaching. It can help teachers to simultaneously keep an eye on the present experience of PE whilst also keeping an eye on the purpose of PE.